Okay, we are ready to start. How are you guys doing?
Good. Just saw the exam.
Yeah, what do you think of it?
Pretty interesting.
Good. I like hearing interesting.
I was trying to figure out how to do the Fred thing.
Exactly. See, that's for some of you, that's going to be the challenge. You're going to have to learn about it. For others in this class, it's not going to be a challenge. So that'll be the way that. God, whoever set this up is a horrible person. I don't know.
And you want it electronic, right?
Yeah, I don't have to do anything.
So not like handwritten and scan it.
You could do it that way if you really want to do it that way. I'll read it that way.
Okay.
No, if you really want to do it that way, that's totally fine. Like this, if I plug in this bad boy, do what I need to do. How about for you two? How's life treating the two of you? Pretty good?
Pretty busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just finished midterm. I kind of had one Wednesday and then one last week.
Right now it's a dead month, you know, the one month of the semester which is most intense. You know,
It is. No, it really
everything's
is.
like ascending to like the top.
No, it really is, because now, and then we're pretty soon going to be in the point where we all have to be ready for everything else. Okay, so finally we're here.
Yeah, October's just like the busiest month of the fall semester.
Yeah. Okay, so what I was saying is that we are actually either on schedule or ahead of schedule, which is really good because the really cool stuff comes at the end, and sometimes I've had to cut it out because I ran out of time. But I won't have to do that, I don't think, this semester, barring anything unforeseen. So the one big thing would be the midterm is up there, it's posted. It's not due for, I've given you more than enough time to do it, hopefully 2 weeks. It's not very long, just start it. And even if you just do it a little bit by little bit, it shouldn't be that bad. I pretty much focused each question on an individual topic and tried to think of basically something for each topic. The only thing that should be of any difficulty, where you might have to teach yourself something, would be how to create a graph using the FRED system, the Federal Reserve Economic Database. My best advice to you would be, if you start it now and you know, oh fuck, this just is not in my skill set, you've got more than enough time to come to me and I'll walk you through it, right? Otherwise, they have like help things and things like that, but it's only one question. So my best advice to you is, even right now, if you're just like, I'm not going to write this until like the day before it's due, totally fine. I'm not, you get to manage your own time. I'm not your time manager. But, I mean, it is 1 of 5 questions. So it's obviously worth 20% of the points. And the bulk of it is your ability to manipulate that graph. So either you're going to be a person that's okay with teaching yourself how to do it, which they give you more than enough resources to teach yourself how to do it, or you know already you can't, and then you say, hey, Scheiding, are you free tomorrow? And I'll come by, and I'll literally walk you through exactly what you need to do. Like, if that's what you want, that's fine. I'm just going to be able to help you the day that it's due, because, dude, I'm a busy guy too. So my best advice to you is look at least at that one question, because that's going to be the hardest one to do in a pinch if you don't know what you're doing. So, okay. Unemployment is our topic for today, and it's actually a really simple topic, primarily because economists care about this topic, but we don't really care that much about the topic because we don't really control unemployment that much. We can try to create economic conditions that make unemployment less commonplace, but again, I was at the Fed last week. The new Fed president, Mary Daly, she was giving a talk, and you know, she was basically saying the same thing of, you know, the Federal Reserve. Yes, it has a mandate for maximum employment, but there's not a lot the Federal Reserve can do for employment except encourage people to go to school, because people who have higher degrees have less unemployment. But there's really not much more than that economists can do to help the labor market. Labor markets are essentially the amount of economic activity going on. And the amount of economic activity going on is largely determined by how healthy the capital markets are and how is inflation doing. Is it being kept under control? Which is, again, the only thing that the Federal Reserve can really then do to control things, which would be control the money supply to control inflation. If you do that first thing, everything else falls into place. That's kind of the presumption that most economists have taken on, and certainly what the Federal Reserve thinks is most important. That's why this is only, I think, 19 slides, because there's not much for me to really say about it except review what you would have learned in principles and add a little bit more detail to it. So honestly, I'm not sure if we're going to be here even beyond 5:30, because it's just not going to take very long to do this. I just don't want to go more than one topic a day, because it makes the lectures nice and tight when I post them. And we're not behind schedule by any means, so I'm not too concerned about that. Okay. So first, let's start with NAIRU. N-A-I-R-U. So what you would have learned all the way back into principles was that there is a non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, NAIRU, N-A-I-R-U. And that N-A-I-R-U is what's also called the natural rate of unemployment. And what the natural rate of unemployment means is that there are some people who are always out of work for some reason. And the two big reasons why people would be out of work would be for either frictional reasons or structural reasons. Frictional reasons would be when I moved here to Hawaii, I had quit my job at the end of May, and I moved here in August. And that would mean that for the months of June and July, I was frictionally unemployed. I was between two employers. I had every intention of returning to one employer, returning to my new employer, but technically I was not working. To be unemployed means, just to review back some days of principles, would be that I'm actively looking for work, but I'm not engaged in paid work for an average of 20 hours a week or more, meaning part-time. So I have to get paid for what I'm doing. And if I'm not paid for what I'm doing, then that means I have to be actively looking for work. If I'm actually working, then obviously if I'm unemployed. If I'm looking for work, then I'm unemployed. If I'm just not working and not looking, then I'm not in the labor force. Exactly, I'm not employed at all. And what we're saying is that there's always some people who are unemployed because of natural frictions in the market, frictionally unemployed. Then there are some people unemployed in a normal economy because they have an outdated skill set. So if I knew how to work on cars that don't have carburetors, right, or whatever. If I only knew how to work on cars that don't have catalytic converters, but I don't know anything else about any other car, well, they don't make those kinds of cars anymore. They stopped making those kinds of cars in the 70s. So if I have a shop and I say I only work on cars that were made before 1975, I'm not going to have a lot of customers, right? And I'm probably eventually going to be unemployed because my skill set is outdated. Just like if I were a professor and said, what's this internet thing, right? Right? I mean, I could still kind of do my job, but if I just said, don't email me, call me, or send me a telegram, you would think, who is this fossil? And right, eventually I'd be unemployed, structurally unemployed. When it means to be structurally unemployed, same thing, I'm looking for work, but to find work, I'm going to have to be retrained. Either for the same job with new skill sets or completely different job.
When you mean like outdated skill, can like your age play a role in that too?
It does. It does. It quickly does. But it could also mean that what if I grew up in an agrarian economy, an agrarian part of the society, never having been exposed to the internet, and then all of a sudden they move to the city and everything is electronic. So it could be age-related, but it could also be geographically, or it could even be something as simple as, what if I decided to move to Spain and I don't know any Spanish? I'd be structurally unemployed because, dude, I don't know Spanish, right? There might be some jobs I could do with English language skills, but I tend to think that immigrants have structural unemployment because either they don't have the academic skills or they don't have the language skills. Now, the problem with structural unemployment is that it's not as temporary and fleeting because I obviously have to be trained year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And if it's an age thing, right, and I'm 55 years old, why the fuck would I want to learn a new skill, right? I'm 55 years old, right? I'm pretty darn close to retirement. So why don't I just kind of stretch it out and, just take the long road, yeah, I mean, so that rate in the United States here is about 4 to 5%. It's determined by the labor market policies here in the United States. It's determined by things like, what does our unemployment insurance program look like? How prevalent are unions? What labor market policies do companies have to follow? Do they have to provide severance? Are there a lot of lawsuits? Let's talk about some of these. So unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance in the United States is managed by the states. Every state is different, and every state finances it differently and has different rules. Here in the state of Hawaii, employers pay the premiums. So that means that for every hour we work, they put something into a pool. It's experience rated, meaning if I'm a firm that has never laid off any workers or has any claims, I'll pay less than a tourist company, right, that lays off everyone every low season. So it's experience rated. But essentially, in the United States now, you get up to 26 weeks. And it's capped. Generally, I think the max is, for most people, is about, I think, $500 a week, I think, is the max you can get from unemployment insurance. It's taxed, so you do pay taxes on your unemployment check. Your unemployment check, to collect it, is going to require that you check in every week and you show how you are actively looking for work. Some states, they will assign you a counselor who will harass you every week. What are you doing? What kind of jobs are you looking for? I went on the internet and found this job that you're eligible to apply, right? I mean, some of them will be on you like a stalker, and then others, right, will just say, call this number, hit 1 if you found a job, hit 2 if you didn't find a job, right? So states will do things differently. Economists, when do most economists expect that people will start looking for a job? If you're unemployed, and it'll last for 26 weeks. Most people start looking around week 20, 21, 22. I mean, people don't start looking. I remember I was dating this woman in graduate school. Kendra got unemployed. She became unemployed. She lost her job. She was working for MasterCard. And she lost her job at the end of January, and she decided not to look in February because she liked the month of February. Yeah, she's pretty screwed up, right? But I mean, but also in this sense, rational as an economic actor, because most people don't start looking right away, right? They take some time off, figure things out, collect their $500 a month, and then 4 months into it, 5 months into it, they start getting worried. I mean, certainly right now, with an unemployment rate here in Hawaii, that's about 2%. Just like a job for everyone, right? I mean, there's more than enough jobs, and people know they could find something. So why wouldn't you take 5 weeks off or 5 months off if you could? And that's kind of what we're seeing here, because the way in which this then rises above or falls below is going to be the other cyclical part. So for unemployment insurance, which is the thing I'm focusing on right now, for unemployment insurance, obviously the claims are really low right now. There's not a lot of people actively collecting unemployment right now. Because to collect unemployment, you can't be fired. You have to have been told by your employer your services are no longer needed, kind of like we don't have any demand for our products. Not a lot of that going on right now.
The actual unemployment rate is below the national unemployment rate.
Yes, absolutely. So what that would mean for us right now, because we are in this time period right now, is that, as I said in that phrase, NAIRU, non-accelerating, that would mean that we're on the opposite end of that, which would mean that we're in an accelerating rate of inflation unemployment rate, right? So we absolutely should be seeing inflation. I was just at the Fed again last week, and they are as equally surprised, at least in the 12th district, as I am surprised that we're not seeing the inflation. We're just not. And I really wish I had a better answer for you, but yeah, as Kristen points out, we are below the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, which would mean that we should have inflation, but we do not.
What would Hawaii do for like unemployment? Like I know how you mentioned like they get like counselors.
You get what?
Like you know how you said like some states get counselors and check up on you.
Yeah.
What does Hawaii do?
Hawaii has a website, I think, where you can post things. It's almost all online. I don't think. I think they do the phone thing. The place is right by.
I know they have like resume workshops and
They do. They have resume workshops. They would have things like, do you know how to use a computer? They would do some mild skill set trainings. But for the most part, people that lose their jobs in those kinds of cases are either losing their job because, and again, for layoffs, which is primarily what this is designed around. Layoffs mean you lost your job because there's no demand for the product that you're delivering. Yeah, you're either doing resumes, how to network. So they'll do like workshops like that, but they really don't do much more on you than that. I came here from Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, they also make you take a piss test, and they do like a whole bunch of other things, right, to make sure you're not using drugs and stuff like that. So different states, because they're on different philosophical, political philosophies, will do different things. And Hawaii being Hawaii, it's pretty liberal, which would mean, everyone gets their 26 weeks. And no one's getting, really, honestly, no one's getting rich off of unemployment. It's $500 and it's taxed. So usually by the end, you're making $300, $325. So try to live on $300. So Kendra had to live off of me for that month of February. No, what are you gonna do? It's 300 some bucks. The site, I think it goes off of Hawaii.gov. If I'm not mistaken, it goes off of Hawaii.gov. I'm gonna share this. So almost anything government related is obviously on Hawaii.gov. You pretty much do everything online, which makes it pretty cheap to administer from the perspective of the state. Because the way that it works is that the federal government puts down the guidelines, and the first time we get unemployment insurance in the United States is in the Great Depression. The federal government puts down the standards, the minimum standards, but then states are free to make things more generous if they want to. Most states don't. And if the states run out of money in their unemployment insurance pool, they can ask the federal government for a loan, which is what most states had to do during the last recession. Did you see one for it?
It said like sanctions or something.
Oh, like under this part?
Paid or something.
So let's see here. Let's just go here. Yeah, so it should just be, yeah. So here it looks like you're just filing a weekly or a bi-weekly thing, depending on how you're getting paid. I can't even imagine they enforce this very much because again, it's cheaper for them just to pay you the $300. So it looks like you would, yeah, make a,
Well, I do know that they gotta do they gotta do such amount of applications.
They do, yeah, but no one asks, no one, they say they could like look and see if you're actually doing it, but no one's looking.
Because my dad had to do it.
Yeah.
He was doing
And did he put in a number of applications?
Yeah, he had to do it, and I had to help him.
Exactly, but see that's the thing, right? But no one's putting in, right? So I'm sure Kendra had to put in something like that too. Where you're like, I'm gonna apply to be CEO, right? And you know your application's not gonna get looked at, but you're forced to do 3, and so everyone's going through this rigmarole, right? This thing, which is again why the state again is not gonna push it too much, unless, right? Unless the state knows. And people can like dispute these things too, right? So if you're actually fired, you don't get to collect unemployment. Plus, some people, right, get fired from their job, but they didn't get fired just yet, right? And then I go to my employer and say, okay, I'm gonna resign and not make you have to fight me getting fired. I'll resign only if you say I get to collect unemployment. Right here at this university, that happens. I wouldn't say all the time, but it happens often enough that, right, you get someone really bad, like, you know, a staff person, and you're just like, it'd be so painful. Right? You get to like, you know, litigate it, you gotta take it to the union, you got, right? I mean, how much do you want to fight it, right? But if the person's saying, I'll resign, I just want 6 months of unemployment, it's like a settlement basically, right? And it's not, yeah, who did that? That wasn't here. Right? There was someone in Wisconsin. What was her name? Oh, she was horrible. She was an associate dean. Oh, what was her name? I don't really remember. But she was really bad. Yeah, her negotiated settlement was 6 months of unemployment. Yeah. So, but I mean, it sucks. Your dad didn't get rich off of it, certainly. And when did he finally find a job? Like month 5, 6?
No.
Was this during the Great Recession or before that?
No, this is like 2013.
Okay. And when did he find something? Like after how many
2,
months?
3 months after.
Okay. Yeah, because basically, right, at least he took some time, right? When he lost the job, right, he's like, I want some time off, right? But then at some
'Cause
point.
he was like, I haven't stopped working since I was 18 years
Exactly,
old.
exactly, right? So a good,
like,
rational
This is my
economic
first
reaction.
break since 18.
Exactly. So you're right. You collect your $300 a week, and you can do it for a while. But then, yeah, it does get tight, right? And you know, at some point, you're just like, okay, I guess I better look. It's either getting boring to sit at home, or I can't afford to keep sitting at home. And then you finally just suck it up and throw things in. But again, Federal Reserve last week. Yeah, we're all confused. So I don't feel so bad. Lots of really good economists are really confused right now why inflation is not accelerating despite this being true. And this is resoundingly true. So this is absolutely true, yet the inflation is not there. And no one knows where it is. And it absolutely should be there. It's the opposite in a recession. In a recession, the unemployment rate obviously exceeds the natural rate. And the difference in this case is, again, the cyclical unemployment. So I mentioned the first one, which was unemployment insurance. So unemployment insurance is one thing that's determining this about 5% natural rate of unemployment here in the United States. Another one would be the prevalence of unions. Hawaii is a little bit unusual because we are much more unionized. But on the mainland, we don't have a lot of unions. There's not most people are unionized. And so the result is, I mean, we know with I'm not saying it would be impossible for me to get fired, but it would be really hard for me to get fired for like a minor thing, right? So obviously if I stab you, I'll probably get fired, right? But if I just say, oh, dude, Levi, you're dumb, right? And if I just say that and make everyone like write an essay about how dumb you are, right? I mean, on the mainland, right? Maybe, right? He'd say my feelings are hurt. He'd go to a dean, right? They'd, start a campaign, and I'd get fired for being mean. But right here, right? I mean, I've got like a union contract. I've got like, other union members that are above me that would fight for me. I have a union that would fight for me, right? And they've got so many things that it would probably be a pain in the ass to like get rid of me just for calling him dumb, right? So, right there, I would get a letter written to me and say, don't call people dumb. But I'm saying what my temporary rudeness is kind of accommodated by a union, right, among other things. And you know, or I could, right? Or I mean, I could just be, you know, I could just be mean. I could just say something like, if you don't show up to every class, you get an automatic F in the class, so you might as well just drop it, right? Yeah, I could do it, and you know, I could have a really onerous policy, and you could complain to someone as a student, certainly. But I suspect most times, even if you did that, you know nothing's going to happen to me, right? Because it's just too much of a pain in the butt to do anything about it. But if I'm an at-will employee, which is what a non-union employee is, I get fired just for stupid things, right? I mean, you really can be, right? I could just be, I didn't open the door for you when you were coming in and you're the boss and you're just like, you're fired, right? I mean, you're a mean person for having done that to me, but you could fire me just because you don't like me. You wake up in the morning, you're just like, Shining looks ugly. I don't want to see him anymore. He's fired. And as long as he's not saying I'm fired for gender reasons, racial reasons, or disabilities, I mean, those are really the only three protected classes, and pregnancy. But even the pregnancy one's a little bit not enforced that much. And we certainly know the gender one isn't enforced that much. Age, sometimes, but age is harder. Race is probably the more prominent one we see.
Yeah.
But age is becoming, not gender as much, but age one is becoming a little bit more important. So with age, it would be, what if Levi keeps hiring young ladies, right, and keeps firing old men, right? Then it's on me, unfortunately, as the old man that was fired, for me to show, dude, this guy keeps hiring all these kinds of people and keeps firing these kinds of people. It's obviously going to be a big pain in the butt, right? And so probably we're just going to settle, right? We're going to go to a lawyer. We're just going to get a lawyer. He's going to say, here's $10,000 and shut up. And, I mean, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it works out. But if I have a union, right, the union's probably going to fight it. So I'm just showing you the way that you see in countries that have more of a union. I'm not trying to promote a union. I'm not trying to bash a union. All I'm trying to say is the presence of a union raises the natural rate of unemployment. Because what we tend to see is that people tend to stay in their jobs who might not be as qualified. You know, as my father would say, there's always with a generalization, there's generally an element of truth, right? And so when we think of the lazy union man sitting in the truck with another lazy union man who aren't doing their job, right, but aren't getting fired, there's generally an element of truth to, right, the lazy adjectives that we're using here. I'm not saying union people are bad. We're just saying they have more protections that make it more onerous to get rid of them. And that's kind of the point of a union, though, too, right? Yeah.
The presence of a union is the natural rate of unemployment or the actual rate?
It raises the natural rate of unemployment.
And unemployment insurance also raises the natural rate?
Yes, it does. Okay. The other one would be the policies and procedures. In France, France is famous for having this big, thick, fat book with all the labor markets and the labor policies that a company has to have if they have employees in France. It's famously complex for someone to lose their job in France in a company. So companies just don't want to hire people in France. Even so, if you're a company and you're doing lots of work and you need lots of workers, it's really, really, you don't want to take on the risk of hiring someone as an employee, because I know at some point I'm going to have less business and now it's going to be hard for me to get rid of them, right? So you just say, either I'm going to work my current workers harder, or I'm going to get 1099, what we call here in this country 1099 workers, meaning contract workers that aren't really my employees. They're independent contractors that I use that I'm actually not aligned with. So like, for instance, Uber, if they were to get rid of all their drivers, Uber wouldn't actually lose any employees, right? Because 1099 workers are not employees. They're just contractors. So the more that we become a contractual economy, that's going to affect the unemployment rate. In this case here, the easiest way to put this would be is that the more policies and procedures we have, the higher the unemployment rate. The more policies and procedures we have, the higher the natural rate of unemployment. Because again, companies are going to say, I'm not going to hire this worker because of all the things that have to go through. Here in the United States, we are largely an at-will employment environment, meaning companies can hire and fire for the most part at will. Again, as long as we're not talking about those protected classes. Which means a company that has a surge in business that they expect to only last for 3 months, why not hire an employee, right? Because I know I could hire that employee. I just be honest, right? Just to be a nice person, but I don't even have to do that. You just say, dude, I got a lot of tourists coming in. I need you for 3 months. If things are still great after that, maybe I'll keep you on, but maybe I won't. And if he takes the job, and sometimes we're all kind of, we all know what's happening. We're all aligned. But again, I wouldn't hire him if I had to make a commitment to him, like I can't get rid of him even if just business slows down, right? Or those kinds of things. Which is why a lot of states are famously, on a state level, are famously anti-union. We call them right-to-work states, or are really in favor of like reducing anything that restricts a company from hiring workers. So for instance, Hawaii, for instance, does not have paid family leave, which in this case, right, would mean if you're a company and you hire workers that are in their 20s and 30s, you know you're probably going to have to pay out for family leave. So, right, what that would mean is that as a company, then if you can't age discriminate, you're not going to want to hire employees as often because you don't want to have to give people paid family leave, right? If you don't have paid family leave, then the unemployment rate will be lower. So there aren't many states in the United States that offer, well, I know in the United States we're the only country, us and like Malawi, I think, or some small country, are the only 2 countries in the world that don't offer any paid family leave. I'm just a little grumpy about it because I just have a kid. But employers are able to do it. So employers can offer paid family leave, but they're not required to. So what we expect with this, as we look at this here, is that we see the natural rate of unemployment changing as well as the unemployment rate changing. Let's just talk about first, why is the natural rate of unemployment changing? You can see it's rising up into about the 80s and then falling. Rising in the 80s largely because we still have things like an old boys network, right, which meant that men got the jobs based on the relationships they had forged in college or who they knew, what their networks looked like. We had a natural rate of unemployment, which was rising largely because unions were still prevalent and actually growing in prevalence at this time. And as well, the 60s through the 80s actually did see more regulation of the labor market in terms of those protected classes I was talking about. Most of that didn't start happening until the mid-60s in terms of racial discrimination, gender discrimination. Even the Equal Pay Act for women didn't get passed until, I think it was 1962, 1963, 64, something like that. So, right, damn it, right away, people asking for equal pay, right? All of those things are raising the rate. We see some states, Hawaii is still a legacy state where we still have licensing for certain jobs, right? Like if I want to be a masseuse, right? If I want to give people massages, I have to have a license. If I want to cut people's hair, I have to have a license. If I want to massage your feet, I have to have a license. If I want to drive a taxi, obviously I have to have a driver's license, but I also have to have a taxi license. Right? So we are a very licensed state. That's not the same way across the country. Many states, all you have to do to be a massage person is have a smile and strong arms, right? I mean, you don't have to have very much beyond, you don't even have to be skilled or trained in any way. you guys were talking about, right? If you want to handle food, you probably have to take tests and wear gloves. And,
Is that like one of the things that they call freelancing or something?
well, yeah. So you pretty much cannot be a freelancer here in Hawaii. It's very difficult to be a freelancer here in Hawaii because you do have to be licensed to do practically anything. But what you see here, certainly starting with Republican administrations, we start to see this downward trend here. Primarily because then unions are becoming less prevalent. Labor market requirements are starting to be eliminated or not enforced. You also then see, too, a shrinkage of the frictional unemployment because people can find the jobs faster. You just have to wait for the newspaper to come out to find a job, right? We can go on monster.com and find our employment, those kinds of things. So we have seen this somewhat downward trend, but you see that in the red, it's not fluctuating that much. It's basically been fluctuating. It's largely estimated to be about, for the most part, about 5%. It really hasn't changed that much. What that means is that the Federal Reserve then would look at that unemployment rate, the actual rate that we're at, the purple, I don't know, what is that, teal? I don't know. They would look at that actual rate compared to the natural rate just to get a quick gut instinct of what they think the inflation rate is going to be. Again, this is only taking us out to 2005, so this is actually pre-crisis. We know now, right, that we are, well, let's stop talking about this theoretically. Let's go to the actual graph. And go to Fred. Fred.
I want to see that graph recently.
The Fred Figglehorn?
Yeah, I want to see that. I want to see that graph we were just looking at, but recently.
Okay, I can do that. So he wants to see a two-line graph. Interesting question that you would ask that. So let's do this. So I'm going to do natural rate of unemployment long-term. That would be the one thing he wants to look at. And then he actually, Levi asked for me. So did you see what I did there? Let me do that again. I went to edit graph right there. So that's how you're going to make most of the adjustments that I asked you to make. So you're going to first, so here, the first thing you type in is going to be that St. Louis Reserve, Federal Reserve Bank measure, measure of the money supply. You're going to type that in. Then you're going to edit the graph. And by editing the graph, you can see here, I can change the percent. I can change, right, how often it's coming about. But here what I want to do is I want to add a line. Because now I want to add in the line for U3. Let's just type it in here, civilian unemployment rate. And then I'm going to add the data series. There we go. And Levi gets what he wants.
Nice.
So then I would download the graph would be the final thing I would do because then I can just integrate that right into the exactly. Now, let's make this a little bit cleaner. So I know in part of the thing I asked you to adjust the dates. So let's just do 01/01/2005. Now this is making estimates too, so I don't want that. Let's just do, let's do, 2018/10 or 09/01. So there you go. Oh wait, so it didn't adjust this, sorry. 2005/01/01. Then go down. So obviously I made this look a little bit easier because I was just typing this in really fast. Obviously, when you're doing it for the exam, you're like, fuck you, Shadi. Like, it took me an hour to do something it took you to do a few minutes. But the idea is that you'll do it once and it'll be easier next time you have to do it and whatnot. So you can, if you just quickly looked at this and you knew nothing about what the inflation rate was right now in the United States, you would look at that and you would say, I think there should be some pretty high inflation in the United States. because I'm looking at, right, a rate where it's obviously as of September is 3.7%, which is obviously below my 5% rate that's estimated to be for my natural unemployment rate. Obviously here, we should have had deflation or lowered prices going on. And that's part of the thing we were talking about at the Fed last week was, what is the legacy of that high unemployment, right? Is that it did create such downward pressure on wages and prices that employees still have the sting of the crisis that happened 10 years ago, that they might be more willing to accept no wage increases than would have been the case in 2005 when they were like, dude, I deserve my yearly increase. And in 2018, even though times are good, the employer is still going to always not want to give you money, right? So they could say, you never know when the next bad thing's going to happen. I got to save some money. So it's either no wage increase or no job, right? And you might say, okay, I'll take the no wage increase. Yeah, Kristen.
The graph on the bottom, right? Is that show like the predicted, and it goes up to 2020? Is that like a predicted?
Yeah, so it was doing a prediction. Yep. So it was doing a prediction there. Yes, if I go back to Max, yeah, the way that it's doing this here is it can at least predict the natural rate of unemployment. And this is just statistically determined in terms of, again, labor market policies.
Do they update the natural rate of unemployment?
It does, but it's not fluctuating much over time because you can see here, like, you know, this is almost 2 full lifetimes. It really hasn't changed that much over time. The big thing would be, again, our actual rates. But yeah, I mean, then the natural rate here, you see this slight increase here. But that slight increase there was because we had structural changes in the economy where people were losing their job, for instance, in construction. People were losing their job in like mortgage refinancing, things like that, where the industries were disappearing, which meant that they were then structurally unemployed and needing to be unemployed in some other way.
About 1982 or so.
Yeah, so this was the worst crisis. This one was so bad. I mean, I remember my father being unemployed at this point. So this was outside of the Great Depression, where we don't actually have the data, but it's estimated that the unemployment rate at the height of the Great Depression in 1933 was 25%, but that's unofficial. We don't know what it really was because we didn't actually start collecting this until 1949 officially, which is why this goes back to 1948. They probably did some backwards data, but we don't start collecting this until right after World War II. So some people estimate 25%, but there was an unemployment insurance program. So that's how they can estimate 25%. But what we know is that not everyone who is unemployed collects unemployment compensation, right? Because I mean,
we don't know about it.
Or, right, if they didn't do the 2 applications a week, you wouldn't get it. Or I got fired. Or, right, I mean, so if I'm fired, I'm still unemployed. I'm just not eligible for compensation, right? Yeah, but you see these fluctuations here. And again, the general prediction is, yeah, it's just never, it's been a long time since it's been this low. It's not unprecedented. Obviously, it's the lowest now since 1968. But dude, we were fighting a war in 1968, plus women weren't in the labor force. That's a huge difference, right? So there weren't a lot of women in the labor force in 1968, which meant that men were consuming most of the positions, which basically meant the labor force was smaller because women were staying at home, you know, pushing out kids. So that really can't count. This can't really count that much either because here you've got the Cold War tightening. Here it's particularly low because of the Korean War. So that took out a huge chunk of people. and now you have limited position. You have limited people to fill the positions because everyone's fighting the war in Korea. Same with over here. Now you're just fighting in a different Asian country. So after that, you have the year I went on the labor market. Yeah, things were pretty good. June of '99. Oh, things are so easy. I don't know what to tell you. June of '99. Let's see. Yeah, 4.3%. Things were pretty darn good. Everyone got a job. I remember even Theodore Brzezinski got a job. He was a guy that at the career fair wore a flannel shirt and like stained jeans, and he got a job. I remember my girlfriend at the time, Rachel Mueller, she was like, go find a job. You're a senior. You got to go find a job. And I'm like, oh, come on. Like, it was like April, and I was going to graduate in June, and I just didn't want to do it. And
Senior in high school or?
Senior in college. So I was a senior in college, and it was April, and I was like, okay, I guess I better make a resume. And dude, I found a job in like a month. So like, you're fine. I mean, at that point, it was really easy because it was the mainland too, right? In Hawaii, sometimes we find it a little bit more difficult because people want a particular job, but there's not that many positions for that job here on the islands. And if you're unwilling to move from the islands, right, you're kind of stuck as is, right, accepting something else.
I'll probably out of your 2020 job would be easy to find, right?
Are you going to see? But that's why when I remember when you came to my office, though, I asked you, are you going to leave the islands, right? I mean, because that is kind of the key question. If you're willing to leave the islands, it's pretty easy right now to find a job.
I'm going to leave islands.
Then you're probably not going to have a hard time
What about
finding a job.
staying?
It's hard. I mean, because then if you say, I want a career in finance, there are only so many careers in finance here on the islands. If you want to say, I want to work in tourism, maybe you'll have it a little better. But yeah, it's a little bit harder. Okay. So let's take these terms then. L, that'll stand for the number of workers in our labor force. E, the employed. U, the unemployed. U over L, the unemployment rate. So this is rather similar to what we did in principles, where we did like all those equations, but we just wrote them out more. Here, I'm not going to write them out as much. Okay, so here's the terms I'm going to use. And we want to go to, actually, Kristen's question of how does the natural rate change over time? So we're just going to do the simple calculation here of the natural rate, which puts us at, if we want to look at the number in our the natural rate of unemployment. Just waiting for everyone to copy things so I'm using. That basically we need to look at two rates. We need to look at the separation rate and the finding rate. So that's why I was saying things like having monster.com has fundamentally changed the natural rate, just as the prevalence of union fundamentally changed the natural rate. Because what do unions do? Well, they certainly reduce this rate, right? That's the whole point of a union, right? Is to reduce the rate of job separations, right? What's the point of monster.com? To increase the rate of job finding. Who looks for a job still in the newspaper, right? I mean, I remember my father doing it way back in the early 80s, but that's because that's how you found a job in the early 80s. You find a job in the newspaper. But yet, state employees in Hawaii, every job still has to be posted in the Star Advertiser. God bless them. I don't know anyone who subscribes to the Star Advertiser to look for jobs. I don't think it's happening. So here you see that S and F are exogenous, meaning they're given by the structure of the system, as I was saying about the natural rate. So it doesn't mean that they're constant. It just means that they're externally given to us, presented to us.
You can't control it.
Or it's not that you can't control, but it's determined
itself
by forces outside of the model that we're dealing with. So economists do have other models for why are unions prevalent in some states but not in others, but that's not part of this. we're just taking, here in Hawaii, we are about 20% unionized labor force, which is the second highest in the country, behind New York State. So about 1 in 5 workers in Hawaii are unionized, which would mean our natural rate of unemployment is obviously different. On the other hand, it's pretty easy to find a job in Hawaii because everyone knows everyone. It's an island, right? And especially if you're on Oahu, it's pretty easy to find a job. Now, the other islands, the labor market is a little bit different, right? If I'm on Molokai, I mean, what am I going to do there? I've never been. Have any of you ever been there?
Nope.
Molokai?
In the Big Island.
I've been to the Big Island, been to Maui, been to Kauai, been the Big Three. So these rates are going to be exogenous. They're going to be given to us. But what that means is that if these change over time, that's why our natural rate is changing. That's why our natural rate is changing.
If they're given to us, are they found on thread? Or are they given?
I don't think, I think the only way we would know this is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives us these numbers. Because these aren't even things that we are calculating. We're putting these in large econometric models and just assuming that these are what the rates are. So these aren't actually measured things, these are predicted things. So the Federal Reserve doesn't even determine these things, they're just given it. Same with the unemployment. I mean, with almost any data except the monetary data, the Federal Reserve does not generate the data. Those things are pretty much measured by others. That's why I thought it was actually kind of cool to use the Federal Reserve to measure the money supply, because at least then it was one of the few things that the Federal Reserve measures. But basically, then you can see this as kind of a stock and a flow model here, where basically the number of people going into the unemployed would be, right, are finding, job finding times the number of unemployed, because that would help us learn, right, in some sense, how many people are flowing. And then the other side of this would be separations times the number of employed, right? When we're talking about how do people move between the two categories, right? So if I am employed and I become separated, then obviously that's determining how I became unemployed. Then to move from unemployed to employed, I have to find the job. Right? So when you're thinking of these arrows, think of it as separation is adding to the unemployed, but taking away from the employed. Finding is taking away from the unemployed and adding to the employed. Now, the most important thing about this slide, though, is that we are presuming, and this is the important thing about this slide, the only reason why this slide exists for me, is that we're basically saying when we say that the natural rate of unemployment is 5% in the United States, we are saying that on average, 5% of the people are moving basically from employed to unemployed every month. That 5% are moving naturally, but that things can then happen at static moments in time that make this a higher amount or a lower amount than 5%. That would be the performance of the economy, cyclically unemployed. But what we can see here is that the natural rate, yeah, it can change, but it's not going to change that much. It's largely, and it certainly is not impacted at all by movements in the economy. So that is what our NAIRU is. It's this steady state. If we are fully employed and we are in equilibrium, then we'd be at about a 5% unemployment rate. The fact that we're not right now is the concerning point. When I was there Thursday and Friday, they were actually happy that the stock market wasn't doing well because, I mean, that's really what they want. They're really trying to cool down the economy. And this was the really important thing. So Mary Daly, the new president, we all had to go there because there's a new president at the San Francisco Bank. So we all went there. All those people that are doing stuff with the Fed, and she gave her first talk, it wasn't a public talk, so it was, she hasn't spoken to the press at that point about coming on. And she was talking about the challenges that all of us economists have to think about. And she said quite succinctly is that what is being attempted right now has never successfully been done, which is how do you cool an economy down before it crashes? It's never been done, and it really has never been done. Every time the Federal Reserve has tried to do it, the economy has still collapsed or crashed or had bad things happen to it. Every time we've tried to cool the economy down. So, and we've looked at this before, and I'm just repeating it again, and I'm gonna go back to the slide just in case you're writing this. I'll go back to it, but it gives me another chance to do something on here. Again, if I just look at, let's just even just do M2. And I'll do 2008 and 01. To now. Why is it? Oh, because of the, never mind. Okay. What do I want to do? Right, when you see an economy that looks like this, the only thing in terms of the money supply, and when it gives you an idea of the amount of stimulation we had to give to the economy to have it survive the 2008 crisis, it required a massive increase in the money supply. Something we've talked about already before, and which you'll do on the exam as well. So the only way you can now cool the economy down is by slowing down or decreasing the money supply, which obviously raises interest rates. Right now, in the world, the United States is the only major economy that is not cooling down. Chinese stock market this year is on course for about a 25% correction, 20 to 25% correction. European markets are down, I think, anywhere from about 5% for the year. And the US is still up a bit. Even if we take out the FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Netflix, so we take out the FANG stocks, we still have an economy, we still have a stock market, just kind of a shadow variable here, but a pretty good approximation of how the economy is doing. That's still up. And it shouldn't be, which is why they were happy last Thursday and Friday when the stock market was falling, because it meant that the market participants were reacting to money becoming more expensive, interest rates going up, and cooling the economy down, which should mean reduced earnings for companies, which should mean lower equity prices. And yet, I come back and Monday it's up. Now, today it's down about 300 points, but I mean, it's still up for the year. And it shouldn't be that way. It's confusing. Economists do not have a good explanation for. Very smart economists do not have a reason for why that's the case. And it's the pessimist in me would say we are not going to be any smarter this time than we have at any other time. So it's likely that we will still have a pretty bad recession, and we will not do enough to avoid a recession, which is largely expected by the Federal Reserve to happen in 2019. But you never know. Economists pretty strongly predicted a recession in 2013, and it didn't happen, so you'd be wrong. It's like predicting rain. Right? I mean, we try to be really good and smart about it, but and we may be wrong, but given the way that we also, this depressing thing that I was reminded of last week was that we are in ahistorical times, meaning we actually don't have any similar time period in the past that we can make a prediction about what will happen in the near-term future. We don't have any time like this where there has been relatively low inflation and a low unemployment rate for a sustained period of time. And we don't have any explanations for it. We don't have any time period in the past to understand it as being similar to. We are in uncharted economic times, so that's all rather depressing. So I really don't have much more to say about this, but basically, we are saying that in the labor market in the long run, is that these two will equal out, and that will generate our 5% natural rate of unemployment, meaning non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment.
You go back to the diagram with the circles.
Yeah.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So based on the definitions in the next line, wouldn't it be the other way around?
Yeah, that you're looking, and this part all depends on where you're putting it this way, that you're looking at the finding rate times the unemployed is contributing to the employed, yes. Don't worry about, I guess in some sense, you could flip the arrows, but what you're saying is true, yes.
Yeah, people get separated, so they become unemployed. But the unemployed find the job.
But in some sense, the way I was kind of making this is that I don't want you to attach, I wasn't intending that you would attach this to this arrow and this to this arrow, just that it was in a circular fashion. But you're accurate in what you're describing here, yes. Yeah. Because we're just basically saying of the unemployed that are finding a job, that means that you're then going from unemployed to employed. Separated from the employed would mean that you're now newly unemployed. Yes. Which allows us then, when we try to look at this equilibrium unemployment rate or this equilibrium natural rate of unemployment, which means that another way that we can describe this. So in principles, again, this is intermediate. So all I'm trying to do is remind you of what you learned in principles and add just one more thing. That's really all I'm trying to do in intermediate. And that's what I'm doing here. So unemployment rate, you learned this side of it in principles, which would be the number of unemployed over the size of the labor force. So now, another way of describing that would be, who's unemployed? The unemployed people are people who are separated, right? The number of people that are separated would be the rate at which the unemployment rate grows. The unemployment rate grows by the separation rate, correct? The unemployment rate grows by the separation rate. And the labor force grows by the summation of our separation rate and our finding rate. So I'm not asking you to solve this, but that another way of describing then the natural rate of unemployment would be our separation rate over the summation of our separation rate and our finding rate. Where again, S and F are kind of culturally determined, predicted by a model rather than actually measured. Yes. I'm not asking you to memorize these equations. I'm just putting them up there to demonstrate how I got what I got. Okay. Then, what's useful for us here, and that these are approximately what exists here in the United States here, is that each month about 1% of employed people lose their jobs, and that each month about 19% of the unemployed workers find a job, which gives us our 5%. And then this is approximately what is true here in the United States. That about 1/5 of unemployed people find a job every month, and that about 1% of actual employed workers lose their job. And again, the reason why you get to 5% is because the base of the unemployed is actually pretty small, right? There's what, 6 million people unemployed in the United States right now, but obviously the size of the labor force is quite large. And all this data is coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is part of the Department of Commerce. So, so the Federal Reserve isn't measuring any of this stuff. But go back to my original description here. You can see how this is culturally determined. Only 1% of workers lose their jobs. If we had unions, that number would be even lower, right? In terms of people losing their jobs. If we look at finding jobs, though, if we're unionized, it might be harder to for unemployed workers to actually find a job. That's just the unionization side of it. What if we again pass this paid family leave, right? It's probably not going to affect people losing their jobs, but it will affect at least people finding a job. So I can introduce to you changes that affect only one of these two things. Something like a union ends up actually affecting both of them. With paid family leave, it probably won't affect too much who loses their job. I mean, maybe I could be a really callous employer and say, I think Levi's thinking of having a family, first to go, right? I mean, I could do that. There's no law against me getting rid of him just because I think he's about to have a kid, as long as he's a guy and I don't, actually reveal why I got rid of him, right? Because I would just say, oh, he showed up late to a meeting. I mean, I'd come up with something else. Well, I'm gonna be a real bad employer, huh? But it is going to affect how people find jobs, because now I'm probably going to want old people who I don't think are going to have a family anytime soon and aren't going to be asking for paid time off. So this is determined by equations. It's modeled for us. And then what I do, and what has been attempted at least over the past 20 to 30 years, is trying to find ways to then reduce the natural rate of unemployment. And you've seen that we've made some progress. The only way we can do that is if we somehow find ways to lower the separation rate or increase the finding rates. So we can lower the separation rates if I find ways, for instance, people to work from home, right? So if I can start to do telecommuting and I can work from home, that means that I'm probably not going to quit my job or lose my job if I have to like take care of my kids, because I could be like, I'm going to do my work. I'm just going to do it when my kids get done with school, and I'm going to do it from home. So I'll be there for meetings, but otherwise I'm going to telecommute to do my job. That's going to reduce my S. And it can increase my F if I say, you know what, I'm an employee, I live here in Hawaii, but I work for a company that's in New York State. And I can do it without moving to New York State because I can do it with telecommuting, right? So I'm just using telecommuting as one example of a technology that's actually reduced the natural rate of unemployment. We can think of other things here, right? I'm not trying to, and this is what you would have to do for exam 2. I'm going to give you a bunch of different scenarios and ask you how does it affect the natural rate of unemployment. We can do that. Okay. Anybody as a professor ever called you dumb in class?
No, we laugh.
See, well, I demand that you complain when someone does do it. And we'll test whether they lose their job or not. I predict they will not. Let's see. Really interested to find out whether that'll happen. I don't want. I'm not going to test it out, but
Test it out.
yeah. So the question would be then, what, obviously we know this. This is something that you learned
Okay.
in principles and you probably thought was confusing when you first learned this, was that the natural rate of unemployment is obviously not zero. Meaning that economists would say right now, we're actually beyond full employment, which means that we're hiring like convicts, not with like big crimes, but like, possession. I mean, are we really gonna stop someone with a possession charge from like working? I mean, I'm not a, what are you gonna do, right? In this kind of economy, you could have a possession charge and still find a job, right? I mean, you didn't harm anyone, you just took them away. But we also know, the natural reason why there's always some unemployment. Again, that's our job search strategies, right? Where we say we're not going to look for work because we want to take a little bit of time off. Or even if I wanted to work for someone, it generally takes at least a few days or weeks to actually get in the payroll system and start. And then the other side of it, though, is wage rigidity. This is probably a little bit more serious, is the wage rigidity. So what the wage rigidity does for us is, obviously we have in the state of Hawaii, we have a $10, 10-cent floor. So no one's getting paid less than that. But also the wage rigidity means that, especially in a state like this where many of us are unionized, our wages actually have to fall within a very tight ladder, meaning that if I have a certain number of years of experience, a certain degree, I have to get paid in a certain range. And I can't go outside that range, either too low or too high. So that's going to impose some rigidity, obviously, because that means that I can't say, you know what, I'm willing to take a chance on you, Cash. You have no experience, but I'm going to pay you 25% less than a normal person in your position. I can't do that right, in this unionized framework I've given you. Nor could I be like an old retired person who's just taking a stupid position just because I want to pay the bills, but I need a higher pay amount because I have all these skills and all these years of experience. Same thing. Right now, I've given you a union understanding of wage rigidity. The other side of the rigidity, though, would be, obviously, it can't go lower than 10.10 an hour, right? So that's obviously something that's restricting the market. But the other side of it would even be rather simple things like the fact that wages, again, don't tend to go down. They don't tend to go down once you're hired, right? For most people, wages are either the same or go up. So that obviously causes some problems. And we've already talked about most of this. I don't really feel like I need to say much more about this. But again, the frictional unemployment is just caused by for instance, economists, we tend to only get hired once a year. Almost all economists get hired in the month of January to February. If you're an economist looking for a job outside of those 2 months, you are not likely to find a job. It's just the way that the structure of the labor market is for economists, which is a pretty small pool. There's about 500 new PhD economists created worldwide every year. You have a certain number retiring, you have a certain number that are exiting the business, and all 500 are graduating, for the most part, are graduating in May, right? Newly trained PhD economists, which means you get a job a few months before you graduate, which means that we all have our labor market interviews at one location every January 3rd to the 5th. So we all go to that one city, we all interview for jobs, we get called back, we go to their campus, usually in late January, early February, we go through all the things, and we have a job offer by end of February, and then you're all set, and then you start in August. It's not to say I couldn't find a job at a different time, right? So it could be that an existing economist snags one of the jobs, then they have to resign their existing job. So all of a sudden, an institution finds out at the end of February, oh my God, my current economist is leaving, right? Then they have to advertise in March. So then economists have what's called a secondary market, which starts in March and ends at the end of April for the displacement that occurred in the primary market. Now that's economists, a very small market, 500 to 1,000 people, let's say. That's very different if we're talking about markets where there are a shortage of positions rather than a shortage of candidates. We just don't have enough economists. We just don't have enough. So they tend to get higher wages because of their lack of existence, and they tend to be able to dictate just lots of other things just because of their, and the unemployment rate among economists, among academic economists, is among the lowest. For us and accountants are probably the bottom too, right? Because we could just do so many other different things, as opposed to picking on philosophers, but right, philosophers as an opposite strategy. Obviously, the labor market conditions are different, so their pay is different, and their unemployment rates are different. Now, we're not saying that even among economists and philosophers that at least these abilities and preferences aren't that different, but certainly they have different skill requirements. When I was walking to my other class earlier today, there was a philosophy professor who was talking to a student, and they were talking about the existence of souls. I wouldn't even know how to have that conversation. So I obviously do not have that skill set. I don't even know what they were. I really don't know what a soul is. I can't wrap my head around it. It's not what I do. And then the other problem, especially here on the islands, is again the geographic mobility. Not really so much information flow. Most of the time here in Hawaii, most of the time it's pretty easy to get the word out because there's not that many people and everyone knows everyone. But geographic mobility is the primary thing. Most people just don't want to leave the islands, even though it would actually be in their best interest to. I can't control that. I can't push people off the islands. I would hope that my children would stay on the islands, but if they want to stay on the islands, not to jump out. Right, but I mean, it's different. I mean, my wife and I aren't, we moved here from the mainland, so it's different, right? Our employers put us here, so we came here with a job. We know that if we'd have to go find a job, if we lost our jobs, we'd probably have to move from Hawaii. That would really be the only solution, unless you're willing to accept some frictional unemployment and lower wages. Yeah, the other examples would be things like, well, we've seen this here, as technology changes, it changes the skills required. As even trade agreements change, it changes. Right, no one right now wants to be a dairy farmer. And the reason why no one wants to be a dairy farmer right now in the United States is because Canada and the United States, in terms of the dairy trade, there's not a lot of money to be made in selling milk in the United States. Canada is great to be a dairy farmer because they have price supports. And so if you're a farmer and there are price ceilings, it's basically ensuring that you're going to get pretty, in this case, higher prices for your services here, or higher prices for the milk that you're selling. Now, what this means for us, though, is that if dairy farmers are unwilling to move across the border to Canada, they will then suffer. They will be frictionally unemployed. If, with NAFTA, we do, to some extent, allow people to move across the borders to work, which means that more Mexicans are becoming truckers. And those trucking companies in Mexico are doing a lot of business because they're cheaper to operate than American trucking companies. Makes sense. United States does heavy manufacturing for the most part. Now, what this means for us here is that then the unemployment here you can see emerges here because of primarily our rigid wage rate. Here we've imposed the wage rate where this would be a price or a wage floor, basically a minimum wage kind of thing. And basically we can kind of see this here that the supply curve of labor is largely vertical because we only have so many people. And if anything, the Trump administration, and I'm not blaming the guy, I don't care what your political beliefs are, but essentially, right, what he's trying to do is reduce immigrants from coming into the United States, which obviously then shifts the supply to the left, which actually does lower unemployment. But that's actually really bad right now, right, in terms of an economic policy, because that's exactly, it makes the labor market even tighter, right? Who wants to pick produce in Southern California? Largely an immigrant job of people that temporarily crossed the border in Mexico, came here to work during the strawberry picking season or the almond season. Those are two really big seasons in Southern California. They would cross the border temporarily, pick largely nuts. There's a lot of tree nut-based products grown in California. They'd cross the border, pick the almonds, go back to Mexico. Yeah, okay, they were here illegally for a period of months, right? But they were willing to do it in previous years because they knew no one's gonna like hunt them down and like kick them back. I mean, I'm just trying to talk about an enforcement issue. But now, if someone is unwilling to do it because they know they can't bring their kids, or if they're unwilling to do it because they know they might not ever be, if you're in an immigration violation, you will never be able to come back into the United States ever again, for the most part. You have no chance of ever gaining U.S. citizenship. That's a pretty big thing to give up, right? All it's doing is tightening the unemployment rate more, which means wages are going to go up higher, which would mean you'd have inflation, even more so. But yet we're not, so I don't know what the solution is here. I'll wait for it. Oh my God, I saw, how much did I see? I had $4.1 million in front of me on Thursday. Yeah, it was pretty nice. They were all in hundreds. It actually takes a lot of hundreds to make $4.1 million. It took a case that was about 4 feet tall. It was about a cube of 4 feet, so 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. Yeah, so it was about 4 by 4 by 4. About $4.1 million.
Is it the most money I've ever seen?
No, it's not the most money. No, no, I've seen.
What's the most you've seen?
What did I see? Back in March, I saw about $233 million. It was in the third basement of the Fed, so it was the big. I was just seeing a case of 4.1 million being dragged from one place to another. In the basement, the second basement at the Fed, they had about $233 million, largely because they were concerned about one of the things. So this is actually really cool. One of the things that we were actually working through is that apparently in the 12th district, the 12th district among all the districts handles the most cash. Guess why? One guess why? Why does the 12th district handle the most cash in any other district?
Wait, where's that one located again?
We're all in the 12th
Wait
district.
for the
So
12th district.
we're all in the 12th district.
Population size of
No, the size of the population in the 12th district is pretty large. It's not abnormally large. What place does a lot of stuff with cash? Katy Perry sings a song.
California.
No, I thought she did sing a song.
In
about
California girls on your way.
Yeah, no, she did sing that song. Yeah, I do have to admit you are correct on that, but no, that's not the reason why.
J. Perry County.
You should sing a song about it.
Okay, so 12
Vegas.
district include.
Vegas.
Oh.
Yeah, Vegas, all cash.
Oh.
Lots of cash in Vegas.
Mm.
So for that reason, the 12th district handles a lot of cash. In 2001, the United States had 40 check processing facilities across the United States. Most major cities had a check processing facility, which meant that the checks were physically delivered to that location. The appropriate debits and credits were made, and then the check was returned to the original depository institution. Anyone want to take a guess of how many check processing facilities are in the United States today? So 18 years after that number of 40.
200.
I guess 200.
Sorry, I was ready for them.
How many check processing facilities do we have? We used to have 40 as of the year 2000.
Check processing is like.
So check processing facilities were in almost every major United States city, and they basically consisted of a 2 to 3 story building where checks were physically delivered, they were scanned, the appropriate debits and credits were made, and then the checks were returned back to the bank.
Oh,
So
we
in
probably
year-
have less now.
So in the year 2000, we had 40.
I say like 20.
Okay, we got to guess it's 20.
Or level 10.
Okay, 10.
30.
And it's actually 1.
Wow.
We have a
No
single-
way.
Yep.
One?
We have a single check processing facility in Atlanta. That's it. Yeah.
I thought it
Federal
was
Reserve,
I
everybody-
thought we would have more.
Not
than-
only are we writing fewer checks, but it's all occurring digitally now. Things are just scanned
Oh, yeah.
digitally.
Everyone uses credit cards now.
Yeah, largely. So we have different. So my first job with the Federal Reserve was in the year 1999. And yeah, we talked about how great check writing was because it delivered about 87 cents in revenue for every check written went to the Federal Reserve as revenue, 87 cents per check written. So Chicago, where I worked, we had a check processing facility there. We had a check processing facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We had one in Des
87.
Moines. We had one in Peoria, and we had one in Detroit. So in the 7th district, we had 5 check processing facilities for about the 5 states that we were covering. And now there's none in that district. The only one that covers the entire United States is Atlanta. But look, right there, those people would be structurally unemployed, people who were scanning checks. So, what we see here as well with this wage rigidity is rationing as well. That would mean that the jobs that do exist have to be rationed to the best workers, which would mean, why is it the case that even jobs that 2 decades ago didn't require a college degree now require a college degree, right? I mean, we see this all the time, right? Secretaries having to have like an associate's degree. Like, really? Does a secretary really need an associate's degree? Can't they do the job with a high school diploma and a positive, demeanor? Do they really need a college degree to do what they do? Or like, look at like the car rental industry, right? Like for people that work at Enterprise Car Rental, they all have a college degree. Like, you really need a college degree to rent a car to someone? But that's the way that we are rationing jobs, right? So we're basically saying and we did talk about this at the Fed last week,
What?
that it is economic suicide now. It is economic suicide to not graduate from high school. It's absolutely economic suicide to not graduate from high school. Like, you have to get your GED. There's no way that you will be able to get a job that you can survive on without even a GED. You can have a high school diploma and work at McDonald's, and you probably will be able to make it. Not well, but you'll be able to do it somehow.
Yeah, I see like some like middle-aged Filipino ladies like
Yeah.
working at McDonald's all the time. And,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Must be supporting their family somehow.
Exactly, right? And it's bringing in some additional income and
It's not just like high schoolers.
exactly, but right, I mean, think about like for the children of immigrants, my mother-in-law is illiterate, right? She doesn't know how to write the written Vietnamese language, let alone English language. She knows a few English words. She can speak Vietnamese, but she can't write. She can do addition and subtraction, but not much more of that. She's completely dependent on my father-in-law and right her daughter and me. So you would need to rely on a family support network. If she were single, right? I mean, that would, if she didn't complete middle school, it's hard to imagine a person being able to succeed in that kind of position. But what we're saying is that as of right now, not having the high school degree is economic suicide, and it's not providing that much additional security, right? You can load bags onto an airplane with a high school degree, but you're basically doing a physical job for the most part, or Walmart. And even Walmart's going to push you to get some kind of degree, right? I mean, they'll pay for you to get your associate's degree or something. It's the Walmart, but then let's go back to this. But does McDonald's really require a high school degree? All I see the guy doing is pushing buttons, right? I mean, I'm not saying that the job is menial, but what I'm saying is that I'm not sure what one would learn in high school is a skill that's required at the McDonald's job. Unfortunately, for those kinds of people, though, in almost every job profession out there, there is some rationing going on. About the only kinds of jobs where you don't see rationing, I did ask the guy at the Kapolei market thing, the guy that collects all the bottles in that big back of that truck. That guy didn't finish high school. So you can be the person that works for Reynolds Recycling and collects the bottles.
So like the jobs that people don't want.
Yeah, really don't
like,
want.
That have like
really shitty jobs. Because it can't even be a state job because all state jobs require a high school diploma. So can't drive a bus.
Can't be a garbage man.
You can't be a garbage man, yep, because it's all city county job. Nope, so you have to work for a private employer who really has a hard time filling the job and will be willing to take you on.
You need a high school degree.
For what?
For garbage man.
What about the factory?
It was just about to be,
I was about to say, do you need a college degree to be
no, I don't think so.
What about high school degree?
You probably
Definitely.
do.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
You guys think you need them for college?
No, Kyle never finished high school. Kyle's a fry cook, Kyle? I don't think
Let's see, fry cook. You be a fry cook, right? That's why you got to finish this 340 class, right?
Well, because like Kyle, like.
Yeah, you don't need it,
like,
exactly.
No, offense,
No, exactly.
He doesn't know how to read.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to read.
Exactly, right? So exactly. Well, what I'm saying is that, right, if we want to be a society, and I'm not trying to be like, put myself on a moral high horse here, but if we want to be a society that at least allows people to say, I don't want to learn how to read, or I didn't have the opportunity to learn how to read, but I don't want to learn to read now,
But I do think
shouldn't there be a job for that person? I mean, fry cook doesn't require a huge skill set. He probably doesn't have to read anything. All he has to see is don't stick your hand in the fryer, right? I mean, it's not more complicated than that. Don't put in a big pile of fries and someone just wants a small.
Well,
Yeah,
like-
Kyle.
I think what's it called? Like the back of house and front of house have different
Mhm.
policies.
Yeah.
Because my coworker he told me how like the back of house, right? Like they sometimes hire people who have criminal records.
Yeah,
The front of house, they're not allowed to work in the front of house. Like,
exactly. Yep.
even if they're hired back of house, they can't transfer to the front of house.
Mhm. Yeah, and also too, I should have mentioned this too. Different states, when we were talking about separation rate and finding rate, the finding rate in Hawaii is actually helped by the fact that in Hawaii, employers are not allowed to ask about your criminal past until you're actually hired. So, right, so I would have to be given an offer and say, we are going to hire you. Then they are allowed to ask me, do you have a criminal past? So, right? It's to avoid someone being discriminated against because they have a criminal history.
Yeah, yeah, they go their headache if they want to like get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. Then you got to figure out the other stuff later. Back of the house, front of the house kind of things. Okay. I've largely talked about these as kind of the ending this part of this discussion here. So let's just talk about these three: minimum wages, labor unions, and efficiency wages. Most of these we've talked about here already. This is the one thing that economists are near universal agreement about, which would be that minimum wages do increase the unemployment rate. They absolutely do. Because they obviously are making the wage more rigid, which means that people are unemployed. Now, the people becoming unemployed because of the minimum wage, we're not generally too concerned about them. It's largely teenagers. The notion of the single mother working a minimum wage job, even though it's what's always in the movies, it's actually not that commonplace. Usually, single mothers work in other kinds of shitty jobs. Shitty jobs meaning physician assistant, child care, preschool teacher. Usually like what we call a pink collar job, a helping kind of job. Those jobs don't pay well. They're notoriously poorly compensated, but they're generally not minimum wage jobs. They're like $12 an hour jobs, $13 an hour jobs. They're just not $10 an hour jobs, right? Who's working the minimum wage? Largely teenagers, those with a criminal past, those, the Kyles of the world, right? I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But not a lot of people are earning the minimum wage. So when we talk about the fact that the minimum wage should go up because people shouldn't have to work for only, you can't live on $10.10 an hour. The idea here that I would criticize at least is that not a lot of people are actually having to live on $10.10 an hour because they're teenagers, right? The teenagers are the one earning the minimum wage, and they're living with mom and dad. So it's not like trying to put food on the table here, but the change in the minimum wage does affect everyone's wages because you do lift all wages then. So everyone's wage would go up if the minimum wage goes to $15 an hour here in Hawaii, because now people who are earning $15 an hour would say, dude, right? I used to be earning 50% more than the minimum wage. Now I'm earning the minimum wage, right? And it's just going to go down and down the line. And this is exactly then what we see here in terms of natural unemployment. But don't be confused by this. It's not the main reason why there's unemployment in the United States. The only thing that economists agree about is that it contributes to the natural rate of unemployment. So we're not saying anything like what the state of Nebraska has said. The state of Nebraska does not have a minimum wage law. They don't have a minimum wage in Nebraska. You can get whatever you get in Nebraska. It doesn't mean that there's no unemployment, though. There's no natural unemployment. Dude, I remember stopping in Nebraska when I was driving my cars across the country, and I stopped to ask directions because my phone had died, and I went to a post office. Did you know that you can mail chickens in the mail? Like alive chickens in the mail?
No.
They had them in like priority mailboxes, and they had like holes on the top of the box. And please move this window away from the shared application.
No, we just press
Oh,
cancel.
they're just saying that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. So apparently what they were doing was that this farmer had all these chickens. He had sold them to someone else. He didn't want to drive them there, so he put them in priority mailboxes. And apparently it's illegal in Nebraska or everywhere to like put a chicken in a box and put some holes in it and mail it off. He said that one of them was dead, or at least it smelled like it was dead. I thought that was kind of funny. And that was my only impression of Nebraska. I don't think I'll return. Yeah. What about the unions? Again, I am a union member, so it's hard for me to be too critical here. And I'm actually the union rep for this place. I don't know. I mean, so 1% of my salary goes to my union every year, every paycheck, 1% of my salary. I don't know. I can't discern. I mean, basically, the primary thing that my 1% of my salary goes to is almost all for collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is pretty expensive as a process because basically we have, as a union, even for us as professors, we have about 5 full-time employees, both lawyers and other fancy people, who basically negotiate with the university and with the state and with the governor for a certain wage rate and certain benefits. And that's the majority of what's spent. Now, we know that the unions then pose a threat because it doesn't take exactly 1% to collectively bargain. It probably takes only 3/4 of that. Actually, the estimate is about 80 to 90% of that. The other 10 to 20% is for all those ads you see on TV where they say, vote for this guy or don't vote for that guy, right? Which is the way then that I say to the governor, I really want that good pay rate. If you give that to me, next election, I'll make sure that I favor whatever you ask, right? So I'm against the whole idea of the unions participating in politics because they make too many commercials and interrupt some really good TV. But I don't trust people either. I'm an untrusting kind of person. So anyone who ever tells me what to do, I generally don't trust the person. But the problem here would be that it is absolutely the case that I am making more money for less work than I've ever had in my life. And this is the first time I've ever been part of a union. And I really cannot dispute that too much. I've never made more money for less work. And I don't know if that's I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but I'm suspecting a little bit that it's a bit more causal than it is anything else. I'm able to teach as little as I do and make as much as I do, not because I have to do any work for it, it's because my union has to do the work for me. Now, read another way, am I willing to pay 1% for that? Totally willing to pay 1% for that. But what it means is that at this university, you could have union professors like myself, and you can also have non-union professors, right? So when you get an adjunct, like a temporary professor, they get paid almost 1/3 what I get paid. Now, I'm not saying I do 3 times better work. I don't know about that. But that's obviously, so what I'm saying is that they might deliver the exact same product or maybe only marginally less, but I'm certainly getting paid more for the exact same activity. Which would mean if you're a university, what kind of employee do you want? Non-union, exactly, right? And so that's why then the whole point of the negotiations now are how many union workers do they have to have versus how many non-union workers will they be allowed to have? Because the threat right now, for instance, is what if you've always benefited by being on a neighbor island because it meant, so for instance, on Maui, I think there's only 2 economists on the entire island. And what they knew is they always had a job because there's only 2, right? And what economist is going to want to go to Maui every day that lives in Oahu? But with online, now the issue is, well, what if I could teach the class online here from Oahu, and I could displace my union, my union brother on Maui, right? Like if I allow my labor force to be more flexible, it actually hurts the union, right? Because now I could hire a cheap worker from Nevada to teach the class or from California to teach the class. So obviously the employer wants these people, and obviously the union wants to keep it like this. So that's kind of the negotiations here. But again, for the most part, this contributes to an unemployment rate in Hawaii, which is amazing. We have among the lowest actual unemployment rates right now, but we still are heavily unionized, right? I mean, it would be like outside of Nevada, to have hotel cleaning people be unionized is like unheard of outside of Nevada and Hawaii. And then the other side of this would be this whole efficiency wage theory. And this goes back to the idea that, as I said, that most people who are in the minimum wage are teenagers, not your stereotypical, single mother. Single mothers are able to capture efficiency wages just like almost everybody else. So I just described to you that I've never worked so little for so much money, but maybe one reason why I get paid so much is because I could do lots of other things and make more money, even more money, but if you pay me more, not only might you get a better worker, but I might not look for something else either, right? Because I might be like, you know what, I like having my summers off. I like only teaching 3 classes a semester. I don't want to have to do more work, so I'm just not going to look for other kinds of things. I'm getting paid enough. And it turns out that most firms don't pay as little as they can get away with. It turns out that most firms actually do try to pay as much as possible because they know if they treat their workers really shitty, they're going to lose their employees, right? This is like, again, the best example I give of this, which some of you heard from my principal's lecture was, right, this is essentially Costco in a nutshell, right? Is that Costco pays its employees like, I don't know, $15, $20 an hour for a retail job that really in most respects is no different than Target or Walmart. Yet those employees get paid a lot, and you see it on their badges, right? It says like, I've been working here since, Jesus' time, right? I mean, and they've done that because they're getting paid really, really well. Whereas the turnover at Walmart is, you're an old timer if you've been there a year kind of thing, right? Because it's a shittier job. And I'm not saying Walmart doesn't pay an efficiency wage, they just don't pay that much higher than the wage. They pay a little bit more, but not that much more. Costco pays significantly more. And then that result is, I mean, I don't know about your experiences, but I don't know, I found the employees a little bit more helpful or at least less grumpy, right, than a Walmart worker or a Target worker for that matter. And we know that they work hard in them because they don't want to lose their really good job. And so they'll go above and beyond for the firm because they have this really good job. But because of that, what it can do, because they're earning this higher wage, it contributes to structural unemployment because if I want to get a job at Costco, it's going to be really hard to because no one's leaving, right? And they're getting this really high wage and no one's leaving, obviously. Just like going back to my job, we haven't hired an economist since I was hired, and that was in 2015. And I don't think we're going to hire an economist anytime soon. Primarily because, right, I mean, those of us who are here probably aren't going to leave. And if they did have to hire someone, they'll just hire someone for a class or two. They're not going to go above and beyond. Or they'll tell you as students to take it from one of the other UH schools and do it online. And there we go. That's basically our macroeconomic understanding of unemployment. But again, I want to preface or kind of conclude this whole discussion by saying the economist understanding of unemployment is, we can talk about it in these kinds of ways and it makes some sense, but for the most part, unemployment, as you can kind of see, is kind of more of a managerial topic, a little bit more of a business topic, and a little bit more of a social understanding than anything economically. The only thing that we as economists react to is what is the unemployment rate, and then as a result, how do we need to think about the inflation rate? So what this now concludes as well, though, if you've been following with the topics here, is that now everything from this point forward is actually going to be pretty new for all of you. Topic 7 is going to cover economic growth. And then we're going to be looking at things like the aggregate demand curve, things that we didn't talk in problem principles. So you're going to be seeing a few new things here with the remaining topics. But again, we only have If my math serves me right, I think we only have like 4 or 5 topics left. So we'll do some new things now, but obviously this wasn't entirely old stuff. Okay, so basically the thing you need to be working on now is the exam. And the biggest thing I would tell you is start to work at least on that one question that requires you to do the database. Because if you're uncertain about how to do that, you can totally come to my office and it will not take me long to exactly walk you through what you need to do. It's just on you to ask me sooner rather than later. I'm not saying I won't help you the day that it's due. I'll help you to the extent I can, but to the extent I can. I mean, I can't. I mean, I'm not going to say, sorry, you should have come to me sooner. I'm not going to be a mean guy like that. But obviously, I think it's due on a Thursday, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
So obviously, on Thursdays, I teach health. I do teach a bunch of different classes all at the same time. So I don't have a lot of free time that day. So okay.
That wasn't too bad.
Not bad at all. Poor Kyle.